Pat Mayo Hour.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Hour, UFC 199. DraftKings picks almost at 200. I want to let everyone know, especially those of you watching on the Fight Network, to subscribe right there to the Fantasy Sports Network channel for not only daily fantasy MMA coverage, but daily fantasy and regular fantasy coverage on every sport. And you can see me more in my element when I'm talking about like football or golf or The Bachelor. Right, Cody?
Yeah, you love The Bachelor.
I like The Challenge more.
And The Bachelorette.
I didn't even watch The Bachelorette this week.
No, don't lie to me.
I'm just running a league. Paul.
You missed it this week.
I did miss it this week.
This week.
Shaughnessy had some hot takes he wanted to get off his chest about The Bachelorette, but there was no forum for him to do so.
He's an excellent judge of characters. He does the same thing with MMA. He might be like, this guy might be more skilled, but he's a shitty person. Avoid him.
So what are we looking at here? I breezed through the prices, and there seems to be a lot of lopsided fights, at least in terms of the odds. In terms of the DraftKings pricing, like I'm seeing a minus 1,000 favorite, minus 320 is like not so steep on this card. So I guess we should start with the fact that we can't afford all of the top end guys. So who are some duds that we're looking at to start our rosters with so we can afford the top guys?
Well, if you look at the bottom end of the list, same thing. If you sort it by cheapest players, the first 8 guys, not really players that you have much interest in, but you need to take some of them. So starting out, some of the safer ones that I think we have here is Jessica Andrade, $9,200. Now at $9,200, Jessica Andrade is worth a poke here on a cash game situation, mostly because $9,200. This girl usually fights at 135 pounds. She's fought some of the sport's best at 135 pounds. She's now moving down to 115 pounds.
That's light.
That's 20-pound difference, right? So she was a small girl at 135 who was just known for her brute aggression and physical strength. But she's trying to wrestle girls that are way bigger than her. It wasn't really working out for her. She's getting really fatigued. Now taking on Jessica Penne. Jessica Penne used to be a champion in Invicta at 105 pounds. She now fights at 115 as well. So if you want to take a poke in a cash game situation that Andrade's not likely going to get finished, we'll be able to go the full 3 rounds, we'll be able to control some situations, then she's worth the play. Dun-Yun Kim. This is the second Dun-Yun Kim in the UFC. This is the worst of the two.
It says Dong here.
Dong-Yun Kim.
You sound like you said Dun-Yun Kim, not Dong-Yun Kim.
Dong.
The Dong.
The Donginator.
He should come out to the Undertaker's music. Dong. Be awesome.
I know.
I swear to God,
Maybe
this guy
it's
fought on the
copyright.
card last week.
No.
Not the same guy?
No. There's no.
All these names are getting mixed up.
I'm trying to think who fought last week's card that would have sounded like
It may have been
Dun-Yun
2 weeks
Kim.
ago. They all blend together for me.
Well, there is another Dun-Yun Kim, as I mentioned. I don't think he fought, no week or 2 weeks ago, but he is the better of the two. This is Maestro Dun-Yun Kim. He was effectively 0-1 in the UFC. He was knocked out due to a slam in the second round of his UFC debut, which took place in South Korea, which is where he's from. But once again, we're getting a weight class change out of this guy. He took his UFC debut on short notice at 170. He's a natural 55er. Now coming back to 55, I think he'll be able to put his judo skills to good use and should be able to ground out his opponent, Marco Polo Reyes.
Is Marco Polo his real name?
His name is Polo Reyes.
All right.
His nickname is Marco.
So his nickname has been so ingrained in everything. Like when I was sorting through DraftKings, his name came up as Marco Polo.
Yeah, Marco Polo.
But no one else gets their nickname as a part of it.
I find it happens with South American fighters because in Brazil, that's the norm. The norm is that your name is like Marcos Imperator. And so it's like...
Or you just go by one name, like Pele.
Yeah, but they might just call you Imperator. And then you'd be like, well, what's Imperator mean? And like translated for Emperor. And you're like, why do they call him the Emperor? And they'd be like, because his real name's Julius. It's like, but like, what's his real name? Well, Julius de Pereira. It's like, well, why don't you just tell me that? But no, they just call him Imperator.
So you like Kim over Reyes to get a win, or just as $9,300 on DraftKings to score some points and last the distance?
I'm not going to lie. This is a 50-50 fight to me. I see it as a 50-50. The problem is Marco Polo's Reyes is like 10-3, which I think is an extremely high price tag to pay for him. He's got some one-punch power, and he's facing a guy in Dun-Yun Kim that not only got knocked out due to a slam in his last fight, but had been dropped in the first round due to a left hook. So the writing's on the wall for can Marco Polo Reyes go out there and knock Dun-Yun Kim out? Yes, it is. But once again, I've got more faith in the fact that Dun-Yun Kim coming down to 155, that'll be bigger. He'll have a full camp instead of trying to take it on short notice. He's got better ground skills. And quite frankly, I mean, like, his cardio and his striking looked good in his last fight. It's just he was taking on a guy in Dominick Steele that was a giant guy, and he wasn't able to pull it through. So when we're looking at value picks, in terms of cash game value picks, I like Dun-Yun Kim. I like Jessica Andrade. In terms of someone who might be able to get to a finish into some good value, $9,600, King Elvis Mutapcic. First of all, his name's Elvis. I mean, what more could you want than that?
He is the king.
He's the king. And once again, he's another guy that lost his UFC debut short notice at a different weight class. He fought at 205 against Francois Barroso on short notice. Now he's coming down to 185, and he's taking on a guy that is known to fatigue. So I think that he's either going to knock King Casey out in the third round or be able to get a clean-cut 29-28 decision. He'll have some trouble in the first round until Casey gets tired. Casey always gets tired.
Well, weirdly enough, the DraftKings pricing for the King, Mr. Elvis, is $9,600, and Casey is $9,800. Yet on the betting lines, Elvis is a -125 favorite. So
close fight.
If it's close fight, but still, just to see a favorite with a DraftKings price or price lower than his opponent, that's always good news.
No, exactly.
Is there anyone in the $8,000 range I can take a gamble on? Like GPP wise, like is there anyone?
GPP wise, you need a finish, right?
Yeah.
So there's only one person that jumps off at me that might be able to get a finish for that value, $9,000. Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres.
You only like him because his name is Bruce Leroy.
He's 11-8, so he loses almost as much as he wins. He's extremely flashy. He's coming back up to 145 from a little run at bantamweight that wasn't too successful, but was decent regardless. The thing is with Cole Miller is that can you catch Cole Miller with something? Yes, you can. For $9,000 in a GPP lineup, am I willing to take that chance? I am willing to take that chance. But when I look at the guys below him, the Urijah Fabers, well, he's got 5 rounds to work with. Does he have a chance? The Dan Henderson, he touches you. You are out. I just don't think any of them get the job done. There might be some better picks. I really don't see those guys getting the job done.
You just don't know which one. Obviously, like...
If you want to take a punt, put Dan Henderson on the punt.
Really?
Punt. Oh, yeah.
How come? Because he can get knockouts?
Because if he touches you with his right hand, you're going to get absolutely knocked out. And he's taking on a guy, Hector Lombard, who had never been knocked out in his career. And then his last time out, he got knocked out by a guy with no punching power, but it was volume punching. That's why I don't think Dan Henderson's going to be able to get the job done. However, it's like, you're playing with a gun here. And if the gun happens to go off in your face, you're going down. Dan Henderson, what he has in his right hand is magical, Pat. It really is. It's something special, unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. But he normally has to take a couple shots to hit you, and he can't take those shots anymore, mostly because he's 45 years old.
That would do it.
How many pro sports, as you mentioned at the top of the show, will come here, tune in to watch other pro sports? What other pro sport has a 45-year-old that's actively playing in it?
Golf.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
That's it.
And I'm sure there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
I'm sure the better guys are 45.
I believe Phil is 45 years old.
Is he the only 45?
No, he's not. He's only 45.
Phil Mickelson.
Yeah. Well, Tiger's 40.
Phil looks like he's 60 years old.
Phil's looking better these days.
No,
I don't like Phil, but
he looks
looking
like
better.
Ringo Starr, man. He looks ancient. Oh, sorry, not Ringo. He looks like Paul McCartney. He looks ancient. Ringo.
Paul McCartney's like a legit 75, though.
I thought that's what Phil was. I was like, man, this guy's lefty and he's 75. I like him.
I'm trying to think who's old, still playing. Chris Chelios played for a long time.
Yeah,
and had like the craziest workout routine ever.
You know what? Those guys,
Peyton Manning's 40.
You have to be in extremely good shape in order to do that. But Peyton Manning, he's a different class. Chris Chelios, that's a great example. This guy's playing for the Detroit Red Wings. He's like 45 years old. I believe he had like 2 points a year or something. Like he had scored 1 goal in 3 seasons or something. Like your numbers start to tail off. Dan Henderson, I was saying this earlier in Boogie Beatdown. His prime of his career was between the ages of 31 and 41, and 2001 to 2011. That's a 10-year prime, which is incredible on its own. But that was still 4 or 5 years ago, right? He's not really in the prime of his life anymore. Hector Lombard, he's tested positive for steroids in the past. He's got that under control.
Does he? The fact that he has that under control by not doing it or not getting caught doing it now?
Well, his last fight was the first fight off of it. His last fight since his suspension. And he looked great in that first round, and then he got really, really tired. So he's like, okay. How about I'm going to stop fighting at 170. I'm going to fight at 185. So he moves up to 185. Now, this is his reintroduction to 185. And I saw this interview with him. They were like, so do you feel a lot better now that you're, 185, not having to cut to 170? He's like, I'm thinking I'm going to 205. And they're just like, what? So, I don't know. I like him.
So, the problem with a lot of these top-end cards that we've seen is trying to differentiate at the top end who the guys that you actually want on your team are. So, you just told me that out of all the underdogs, Dan Henderson's one-punch potential could put Hector Lombard into some problems. He could go down.
It's a punt team, but
Does that mean you're not taking Lombard? He's $11,000. Are there $11,000 guys you like more?
No, I took Hector Lombard. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
When I looked at the pricing on it, okay, Luke Rockhold's the most expensive guy. Do I think Luke Rockhold finishes? Absolutely, I think he finishes. He's got 5 rounds to deal with. He's a bit of a slow starter. Michael Bisping's the kind of guy that can hop on you early.
Michael Bisping.
Yeah, he can work you a little bit, right? So for that reason, I think this fight, though it's going to be a stoppage, could be a stoppage in 3rd round, 4th round, maybe 2nd, but 3rd or 4th round. Can I pay $11,400 to someone who's not going to get a first-round finish? No, not likely. Now we got what? Dominick Cruz is the second most expensive guy. Dominick Cruz is almost a guarantee to go 5 rounds. So he's not going to finish this fight. So I do not want him either. Now I'm left with, okay, I've got Hector Lombard here. Hector Lombard, $11,000. I think he gets the finish. Can he get the finish in the 1st round? Yes, he can. Can he get the finish in the 2nd round? Absolutely. If him and Rockhold both finish in the 2nd round, well, he's getting $400 cheaper. And I think he's still got the ability to finish 1st and 2nd, whereas Luke Rockhold's going to drag it out a little bit. Dominick Cruz is going to drag it out a little bit. So I just think he's the better play. I didn't play Dan Henderson as a punt on my team, but the people that generally win these GPPs are going to play 5 or 6 different teams. And if you play one that has Dan Henderson on it, and everyone else is playing guys like Hector Lombard, right? Dan Henderson goes in there and knocks him out.
It works. It's almost like reverse line movement in football, where if you have the guy that no one owns that wins, and the highest owned guy in the field is the one who loses, you're going way up the leaderboard. That's actually the game theory of how you win GPPs.
That would be a play here.
And in MMA, it's actually, I don't want to say easier because it's harder to identify which one of these upsets is going to happen because so many weird ones do happen. But you need to be willing to take a chance on some guys that even if you don't think they're going to win, if you're going to play 5, 6, 50 lineups, you need to roll them out there in a few.
Yeah, and I just don't think Dan Henderson's a super popular play. He might be because people know of his history.
It's true. I know who he is. So
well, he's knocked out Michael Bisping at UFC 100. And as you mentioned, we're coming up on UFC 200. So needless to say, he's kind of been around for a long time. But can he go out there and get the job done? Sure. I just think that Hector Lombard, should be the better play.
Who is the best pick for a quick finish on this card?
Probably Hector Lombard.
Really?
Hector? Well, okay.
Like there's no one even like the undercard?
Yeah, Brian Ortega, T-City, right?
T-City?
T-City. Call him Triangle City. Mostly because he just throws up triangles. And if he catches you, which he normally does, you're done. If he doesn't, he'll just switch it off to an armbar, and then you're done. This guy has got a tremendous amount of game, grappling credentials like none other. The guy he's fading, Clay Guida. Clay Guida's been around for a very long time. Clay Guida's been fighting professionally since 2005.
He is 32-13.
Yeah.
A lot of fights.
Yeah, and I thought he had 14 losses, but regardless, he's got more losses than his opponent has fights in general. He's been choked out 8 times in his career, submitted 8 times in his career, and his opponent is a submission player. So whenever this fight hits the ground, Brian Ortega is completely in charge. Clay Guida can be a savvy veteran. He can go in there, he can control the action, but in his last fight, he got choked out in 50 seconds. That same guy that choked him out in 50 seconds got beat up by Brian Ortega. So I just feel like Clay Guida is a guy that, would never challenge for a title, but always fought the best guys. And now that he's getting a little bit older, he's coming down. Brian Ortega is a young guy who's smoking everybody.
He's on
his way up. And for that reason, we got one guy that just got choked out in a minute in his last fight, now facing a better grappler who had previously even beaten that guy that just choked him out. So logic dictates, Pat. Logic dictates that Brian Ortega will finish, and he'll finish early, and he's definitely worth having. He's a quick finish. But logic's never really right. So be careful with that one a little bit.
But he's someone that you would want on your team either way.
Yeah, 100%. And I played him on cash game as well, but I feel he's more of a GPP play.
Really?
Yeah.
You can play him on both, though.
You can play him on both because even if he loses, he's not going to get finished. He'll score, a good amount of points.
How about your boy Beneil Dariush, $10,000?
Dariush. Yeah. Beneil Dariush, this one hurts me because I had to actually play James Vick on a GPP. I think Beneil Dariush wins. I really do. Beneil Dariush is going to hold him up against the fence. He'll get some takedowns. He'll try to take his back. He'll try to out-grapple him. He'll try to win 3 rounds and get the decision. However, he's just going to try to win the 3 rounds and get the decision. James Vick has a good chance of winning this fight as well. But he puts hands on guys. Former pro boxer, tough dude. He's got some finishes by guillotine, although I don't think he chokes out Beneil Dariush. Didn't think Beneil Dariush would get choked out his last time out either, and he did. So, I think that the path to victory is there for James Vick, and at $9,400, I have to take the poke on a GPP. Because as you mentioned earlier, when you look at these guys between the 8,000 range and the 9,000 range, which one of them could potentially get a finish? I look at it, Bruce Leroy, James Vick, Elvis Mutopcic. Those are my 3 under 10 grand players. I can afford 2 over 10 grand players, and then it's just all about selecting the proper ones.
All right, well, let's get to your cash team right now then. Who is making the cut?
Okay, so cash game. Number 1, Hector Lombard. As I mentioned, it came down to 3 guys. I liked him more than Dominick Cruz. I liked him more than Luke Rockhold because he was a better price tag on him, so we're going with Hector Lombard. Then we're moving to T-City Brian Ortega, $10,900. He's exactly $100 cheaper. And once again, this is someone who has a lot of finishing ability. His last 3 fights, his only 3 fights in the UFC, he's finished all 3 of the opponents. 1 in the first round, 2 in the third round. He's a very potent finisher. He's faced levels of competition along the same lines as Clay Guida, and he's done exceptionally well. So I think he's got a good shot. Elvis Mutoptic, as I talked about him earlier, $9,600. I think he takes Kevin Casey into deep waters. I think in the third round he's going to TKO him kind of late, so he'll be able to get the 25 points off that. But, just volume of output during the fight itself, I'm okay with that. Plus, it's a cash game. I just need the win. Dong Kim, $9,300. Obviously, I'm getting down to the end of my bankroll here.
Yeah, well, if you're going to take 2 guys that are almost $11,000, you got to save money somewhere.
Exactly, especially on a cash game. Normally, you just want to take safe guys the whole way through. But
there are no safe guys here once you get down to a certain level.
That's exactly it. So for $9,300, I'm going to take Dong Kim. I think that he's going to have a better performance here now at his reintroduction to 155 pounds. And then Jessica Andrade, $9,200. Very strong girl, very powerful. I just really need her to grind out the first 2 rounds and then coast that third round. I don't really care if she does anything in the third round. Just secure those first 2 rounds.
GPP lineup, how much does it differ?
GPP lineup, I have to take some chances here. So I want Hector Lombard because, once again, that's the guy that I want to start off my team with. Then Jonathan Wilson, $10,700. This guy's a big boy, 205 pounder, 6'1", moves exceptionally well on his feet. His UFC debut, he knocked out Chris Dempsey in 50 seconds. Chris Dempsey's a big boy as well. So I think that he definitely has the power. In 7 pro wins, only one of them in UFC, but in 7 pro wins, he has finished 6 of his opponents by way of knockout. So I know this guy's a knockout fighter, training out of Millennia MMA in Southern California. Everything should be on track for Wilson. Now his opponent is Brazilian. We can't even figure out his name. Paul actually made a good joke with him.
Luiz Henrique da Silva.
Yeah, they always change it. They call him Frankenstein. It's mostly because everywhere you see, they take a little piece of his name and they add it. And now he just ends up with, say it again.
Luiz Henrique da Silva.
Yeah, and then he has
if he was French, that's how you would say it.
Oh, is he French? Well, there you go. He's heritage. Take a little piece. It's this guy's just a mix of a bunch of different things.
Is he any good?
He's got a win over a guy that used to fight in the UFC, Ildemar Alcantara. So, based on that, people will be like, oh, yeah, he's okay. He's 10-0. He's unproven. He got into a slugfest with a jiu-jitsu guy who was fighting 30 pounds over his weight. So it's hard to take anything from that. You try to find footage on this guy. It doesn't exist. The only footage that does exist is camera phone footage. And that camera phone footage seems to be flip phone camera footage. I know. So I just think he's operating at a low level. He's 10-0 for a reason. But we saw this his last time out. My mistake, and I'll own up to it right now. We took a guy last week by the name of Alberto Uda. He was a 9-0, unproven Brazilian guy, known to have some knockouts.
He lost.
Well, yeah, we took him. He looked good in the first round, and then the second round, you've never seen someone more fatigued in your life. I think the same thing might play out here for Frankenstein. Frankenstein might go in there, and he might have a hot first round. And after that hot first round, when Jonathan Wilson's still standing there, he's going to be like, oh, man, Jonathan Wilson should be able to take control. Aside from that, I think Wilson finishes in the first round. But if he doesn't, I think he's got the skills to take it 2 and 3 and finish. So Jonathan Wilson, sign me up. And then, Jonathan Wilson, sign me up. Elvis Mutopcic, $9,600. James Vick, $9,400. And Bruce Leroy, $9,000. As we mentioned with these guys, they're value plays for a reason. They're coming in, most of them as dogs, but they do have a good opportunity to finish, and I think that these are the right selection of dogs. The only other way you can make a better team, in my opinion, is if you take someone like Luke Rockhold, but when he doesn't finish in the first round, you're getting as many points as somebody else who, Brian Ortega is going to finish in the second round, and you just paid infinitely more for Luke Rockhold to get the same thing, if not less, and now your bottom is really, really bad.
On a card like this...
it's a tough one. This is the toughest DraftKings team I've had to make in a long time.
So would you recommend not playing as much as usual, or would you recommend something like, hey, this is the lineup that you're putting out right now is probably going to be conventional wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Like when people look at this, the people that know about MMA, I'm not one of those people, you are, that you would come to some sort of consensus about Hector Lombard. Out of all the top 3 guys, he may not be the most likely to win, but the most likely to finish. And that's what we want for these DraftKings teams. Is there a way where I could take someone maybe who is over $10,000 that you just don't think people are going to take? That, maybe they don't have the best upside. But as we've seen before, what was the one card in Brazil last year where, all the upsets hit?
Yeah, but the last 2 UFC cards, a lot of underdogs have hit. So last card, there was 5 or 6 dogs that hit. Week before that, same thing, 5 dogs.
But we did well with the upsets last week.
Absolutely.
That's what fueled all our cash teams to win.
Exactly. You've just got to be able to differentiate and just be like, oh, a Chris Camozzi is a 2-1 dog, but okay, I'm going to play someone like that. When I look at this card, the dogs don't like dogs particularly. There's not a whole lot of dogs that jump at me. And
how is this a pay-per-view with all these imbalanced fights?
The main card especially, because the main card seems to be very one-sided.
It's minus 1,000.
Well, short notice. So Michael Bisping has actually been filming a movie in Toronto, Triple X in Toronto.
Triple X 3?
Is there a second one?
Yeah,
it's State of the Union.
The second one has Ice Cube.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. The second one does have Ice Cube.
Yeah.
So is this only 3?
I guess so.
Okay, well, Conor McGregor.
Is Vin Diesel back?
Duh. So apparently that's been his top training partner for the past 6 weeks. So you know what? I'm taking Michael Bisping. If he's working with Vin Diesel, what can Luke Rockhold possibly do to this
By
man?
the way, Vin Diesel's also like 55 years old.
As long as he's wearing those sweet glasses from Pitch Black. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, yeah, I saw the second one too, Chronicles of Riddick.
I didn't like that. Pitch Black.
Pitch Black is
legit.
really good. But the whole problem is this now we're getting to my specialty here. The good thing about Pitch Black, I mean, it did have Dame Judi Dench in it as well. But Riddick was like a side character.
He
was a cool character.
Yeah.
It's like we don't see too much of him. He's great. Then you make a movie about him. It's like this guy's kind of a loser.
I thought the same thing. I was like, this is real weird. And they're like, oh, this backstory that he comes from this planet. It's like backstory. He was just the cool guy with the glasses that took care of business.
The only reason that movie got made is because Pitch Black came out, then Fast and the Furious came out. Vin Diesel became a star, and they were like, we'll just sell this movie off Vin Diesel. It's not going to be any good.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
How do you think Triple X got made? I saw Triple X in theaters like
So did I.
14 years ago. Or
Oh
when the hell
my
it came
God.
Out.
I was at my friend Ryan Donnelly. He works at this UFC gym, right? And then you get a weird group of people at the UFC gym. Not because they're not nice guys, but it's
They get hit in the head for a living.
it's the good life fitness of mixed martial arts training.
Okay.
So you get a lot of mom and pops, but you also get guys that come in that they're just like, oh, hey, man, how are you? I'm good, man. Like, what's your profession? Fight full time. And you're like, well, how many fights have you had? And you're like,
none.
Got my debut coming up a couple months from now. And you're like, well, you actually don't fight full time then. Like, I'm sure you have a job somewhere. Anyways, this guy's in the other day. I was lifting weights. I'm like, man, who's this guy? He's like, oh, yeah, nice guy, whatever, comes in, lifts weights. Nice guy. I'm like, oh, yeah, like, he just comes in here to lift weights. He's like, no, he says he's a fighter. I was like, well, how many fights does he have? He's like, well, none. Right, so I see the guy put his weights down, and he's got a Triple X tattoo.
Good for
in
him.
The back
Good
of his
for
neck.
him.
I was like, this is not real life. How is this happening right now? So if Michael Bisping comes out sporting a Triple X tattoo,
You're in on him.
all the money.
Live betting Michael
all
Bisping.
of the monies. But fact is, he's coming in on like 2 weeks' notice. He's been in Toronto the last 6 weeks, not really training.
Have you seen him around town?
Yeah, a couple. He was at that UFC gym teaching a seminar, actually,
Okay.
funny enough. And then,
He didn't get like neck fat rolls like Vin Diesel has, does he?
well, word on the street is that he was at a bar just having a couple casual drinks, and someone picked a fight with him, and he knocked the guy out.
Good.
So-
Well, I mean, there's your training right there.
So he's got some sparring in the last 6 weeks, but he's been eating a lot of like roasted chicken and potatoes and enjoying himself. And now it's like, hey man, what do you weigh right now? It's like, I don't know, 207. It's like, well, can you make 185 flat in the next 2 weeks? It's like, yeah. Well, when do you fly home? Well, another week from now. So it's like you're trying to get ready and you're trying to get on set on time and you're trying to rehearse these lines. Like they've fought before, and Luke Rockhold choked him out with one arm, right? He hurt him, kind of because of a headbutt, but he hurt him, he choked him out. So now we're getting Bisping on a week or two's notice against Luke Rockhold, who's training for Chris Weidman. So he's good. He's
What
going to be
happened
good.
to Weidman?
I believe he hurt his neck.
Ew, that's not good. You don't want to fuck around with that.
You know what? I'd say the same thing, but last week, Rick Story, right? I had some money, same thing, dog selection, Rick Story, and he took 2 years off, almost 2 years, 18 months off, neck injury, right? Apparently some FDA recently approved thing, they can put like these discs in your neck, right? Like these like plastic discs, and they're like, how do you feel? He's like, I haven't felt this good since high school. So I was like, that does not sound good, does not sound safe. I saw this guy, he's like a doctor, he just tweets about like injuries in sports. He's like, there's no way this man should be approved. So I was right about to put money against him. I was like, hasn't felt this good since high school. Give me that. And he looked good. So I think Weidman will be back eventually.
And we cashed in on Story 2.
Yeah, the horror story.
Cody Saftik, check him out every week on Bookie Beatdown with Paul Shaughnessy, and follow him on Twitter at CJSaftik, and you can follow the Bookie Beatdown on Twitter as well at Bookie_Beatdown. Follow me at the PME, and remember, subscribe to the Pat Mayo Hour under the Fantasy Sports Network feed at Fantasy Sports Net on Twitter and on YouTube under Fantasy Sports Network. I'm Pat Mayo, and I'll see you next time.
For the latest expert fantasy sports strategy and tips on YouTube, click subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and call your local cable TV provider to order Fantasy Sports Network, or watch us on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Xbox.